This video is an interactive video. You are invited to participate by stopping the video every once in a while in order to do what is asked, or to have a conversation with others about something. But of course, the choice is yours. The topic is the Lasallian Catholic community that is your own. Like most communities, it is probably neither perfect nor completely awful. Rather, it is somewhere on a spectrum. And the more you think about, the more you talk about your own experiences, plus listening to that of others, the more you will discover where the hinge points are and where you can make a real difference simply by what you do or what you say when you are a part of your community. The first thing to notice is that a community exists for a purpose. It embodies a particular mission and vision, and it has a particular way of doing something, a certain approach. In our case, as a Lasallian Catholic community, we engage the deeper dimension of our lives and of the lives of others. Prayer and spirituality are not just nice-to-have things. Community, mission, and spirituality are integrated into a living, breathing whole. And how we do one of these affects how we do the others. It is something like this piece of artwork by Shigeo Fukuda. It may not make much sense at first. All the details of our lives in a community, including the bits that don't look so attractive or that seem to be the most challenging, all those details may be seen in their effect as being part of a larger picture, a larger perspective. And the more we think about and talk about the details together, the better chance there is that this larger perspective is seen by the many. So here's your first invitation. Take a minute or whatever time you need to think about or write down or talk to somebody about how you would finish this sentence. I see community in my particular place when fill in the blank. You're invited to now stop the video and do that. Then we'll continue. Okay, let's go on. Let's approach this notion of community from the perspective of the other communities that we are part of. We are all part of the community of the human family. And within that human family, we are part of, at least by working at the school, of the community of the Catholic Church. But more specifically, we are part of those who work in Lasallian education at institutions around the world. And most specifically, our educational community is lived each day at my specific Lasallian school or ministry. That's where it all comes together on a regular basis. So, briefly, what does it mean to be a Lasallian Catholic kind of community and school? What difference does this make in the grand scheme of things? One helpful way to look at it is this way. To be a Lasallian is a way of being Catholic. It is a being Catholic through the lens of our Lasallian charism and heritage. It is bringing the gospel to the world of education, to quote the Brothers' Rule. There is a Catholic core and a Catholic focus. So this is not an unimportant part of who we are or what we do. But the way it is lived, the way it is expressed, the way it is brought to life is through the charism of St. John Baptist de La Salle and those he inspired and led and the schools that came about. Here is a quick way to see the relationship through our familiar 5 core principles. In 2006, Archbishop Michael Miller, the former secretary of the Congregation for Catholic Education in Rome, went through all the contemporary Vatican documents on the topic of education and summarized their content in a little booklet. You can find the PDF online if you wish. In that booklet, he highlighted what he called the 5 essential marks of a Catholic school. It turns out that those 5 marks bear a striking resemblance in language that is aligned with our Catholic faith to the 5 core principles of Lasallian education. Here's how. For the first one, he states that in a Catholic school, we are inspired by a supernatural vision. Catholic education is a process that forms the whole child, especially with his or her eyes fixed on the vision of God, who will be good citizens of this world, enriching society with the leaven of the gospel, and fulfilling what is finally a saintly destiny, a life in Christ through the Holy Spirit. The emphasis is on the spiritual dimension of the human person and the spiritual dimension of the world. This description aligns with the Lasallian core principle of faith in the presence of God. It is regularly expressed in the invocation, "Let us remember that we are in the holy presence of God." With this perspective, we live out the deeply held Catholic Christian belief in sacramentality, in the fact that God's life is manifested and found throughout our daily experiences. And this has implications for what we teach, how we interact with our students and each other. It shapes the environment we create in our schools and how we attend to the religious and spiritual lives of our students and colleagues. Secondly, a Catholic school is also founded on Christian anthropology. Archbishop Miller writes that repeatedly the Holy See's documents emphasize the need for an educational philosophy built on a correct understanding of who the human person is. The Christian concept of the person attributes to the human person the dignity of a child of God. It calls for the fullest development of all that is human. The Catholic school sets out to be a school for the human person and of human persons, centered around the model and presence of Christ. Nicely put. This description aligns with the Lasallian core principle of respect for all persons. De La Salle tells his followers, "Recognize Jesus beneath the poor rags of the children you instruct. Adore him in them." Everyone shares in being created in God's image. Lasallian pedagogy has its basis in Christian anthropology, and its educational endeavors are designed and implemented with this in mind. All have an essential dignity befitting a daughter or son of God, and all deserve to be treated as such. Third, a Catholic school is animated by communion and community. Catholic schools propose an alternative model to that of an individualist society. It is rooted both in the social nature of the human person and in the reality of the church as the home and the school of communion. This is expressed through people working together in a familial school climate, in the collaboration between educators and church leaders, and in the personal accompaniment and rapport with students in a physical environment, one that is illuminated by the light of faith, in terms of having a chapel, prayer, and the like. This description aligns with the Lasallian core principle of an inclusive community. Ideally, a Lasallian school is a united community where diversity is respected, where no one is left out, and where everyone finds a place. Individuals within the school community recognize and accept one another's strengths and limitations. The Lasallian history of the brothers, who said that they were brothers to one another and older brothers to their students, is extended today to all Lasallian educators, older brothers and sisters to their students, and associated together in relationships nourished by mutual esteem, trust, respect, and friendliness. Individual diversities are considered an opportunity and a gift, and should be recognized and embraced as such. Fourth, A Catholic school highlights an integral education that develops every capability of every student, his or her intellectual, physical, psychological, moral, and religious capacities. A Catholic school must be constantly inspired and guided by the gospel and the person and teaching of Jesus Christ. Catholicism is a comprehensive way of life that should animate every aspect of its activities and curriculum, fostering a love for wisdom and truth, and preparing students to relate their faith to their particular culture and to live it in practice. That description aligns with the Lasallian core principle of quality education. For us, a quality education is described as an education that prepares students not only for a job in college, but for life, advancing the students' abilities to use their talents to critically examine the world and contemporary culture in light of the message of the gospel, and to take greater responsibility for their own education. Lasallian educators live out this quality education through the curriculum, through their pedagogical methods, professional development and formation, and through the school's environment, the one they create. This is an education that prioritizes the whole person. Finally, and fifthly, a Catholic school is sustained by gospel witness. This refers to the critical and vital witness of a Catholic school's teachers and administrators, since they reveal the Christian message not only by word, but also by every gesture of their behavior. Catholic educators are expected to be models for their students by bearing transparent witness to Christ and to the beauty of the gospel. Church documents pay a great deal of attention to the vocation of teachers and their participation in the church's evangelizing mission. While de La Salle also speaks of the importance of personal example and modeling, the Lasallian core principle of concern for the poor and social justice is not as focused on the witness of school administrators and teachers to their students, but rather on the witness of administrators, teachers, and students outwards. The Lasallian school calls its members to an awareness of the poor and victims of injustice and responds to their needs through programs of community service, of advocacy, and of justice education. As the Congregation of Catholic Education also notes, in particular, schools would not be a complete learning environment if what pupils learned did not also become an occasion to serve the local community. Gospel witness informs and sustains Lasallian education, lived out in terms of those admitted to the school and in terms of the developed sensitivity of all students toward the marginalized. All of these aspects, whether articulated in Catholic Church documents or expressed through their Lasallian lenses, all of them revolve around an essential focus on Jesus Christ and the gospel. We live out the gospel through a very specific educational community, a Lasallian educational community. That's where we turn to for guidance and sustenance. And that's from where we're able to effectively live out our vocation as Lasallian educators. Our work, our ministry, our vocation is part of the ministry of the church and expresses the ministry of the church. Similarly, our life as a community finds its wealth and richness in the ministry of education, one that has been entrusted to us by the church. As the Superior General, Brother Robert Sheeler, once said, the decisive innovation of the founder was that education is conducted in the context of community. Before going on, I invite you to take another moment to reflect on something specific by filling in this sentence once more. I see community at my particular place when fill in the blank. Stop the video and take a minute to do that. Then come back for some thoughts by De La Salle on the topic of community life. Okay, let's go on. The experience that you have as a Lasallian educational community is different for everyone. But it is also multifaceted. There are specific touch points with specific members of that community, some stronger than others, some more preferable than others. And while all of those touch points together may be inconsistent, they are nevertheless cumulative. Together, they make up a certain kind of character, they make up a certain kind of culture. They make you who you are. De La Salle felt so strongly about the importance of community life as part of this educational charism that he wrote about it frequently. The best quote from him I can think of is probably this one. Union in a community is a precious gem, which is why our Lord so often recommended it to his apostles before he died. If we lose this, we lose everything. Preserve it with care, therefore, if you want your community to survive. These are very strong words. If we lose this, we lose everything. Without union, a community will not survive. There's not a lot of wiggle room or nuance here. This is something that is part of the core, part of the prime directive, if you will. And if that's the case, it's worth our attention, our focused attention. And it's worth talking about, thinking about, listening to others about. Okay, so how do you have a good community, De La Salle? Thankfully, he had both feet on the ground and 40 years of experience with these early brothers. He was well aware of the fact that often everything is not rosy. This is also what he wrote. It is impossible for several people living together not to have to suffer from one another. One will have a touchy disposition, another will have a contrary spirit, another bad manners, another will be disagreeable, another will be too prone to give in, another will say what he thinks too quickly, another will be too reserved and secretive, another will be too critical. Now, I'm sure that this doesn't happen in your community, but perhaps you have heard rumors of it happening in other communities, so it's worth talking about. If there are people in a group, your group or any other group, there are all sorts of dynamics at play. So, when things don't always go right, what can you do? Well, De La Salle was aware of the challenges, and he was clear on how they can be dealt with. He also wrote this: the way to maintain union in a community in spite of all these different personalities is to bear up charitably with the defects of one another, to be ready to make allowances for others, just as we want others to make allowances for us. This is what we necessarily commit ourselves to do when we decide to live in a community. Pay serious attention to this today and for the rest of your life. Not bad advice. As both the Old and New Testaments indicate, treat others as you would want to be treated yourself, which sometimes means bearing with one another, seeing a challenging situation as an invitation to practice charity. The simple rule, according to De La Salle, is this one: never speak except in a kindly manner. And when you fear to fail in this, remain silent. The right solution, of course, but also one of the more difficult things to do, especially for those of us who believe that we know for certain that we are right. It is how we integrate ourselves into the larger community that will not only help to create who we are as a Lasallian community, but it will also shape how we become individually within that Lasallian community. We are finally engaged in a school of charity, along with the school of education, both for ourselves, our students, and our colleagues. This came home to me during a short 10-day Camino in Spain in 2015 with a group of brothers and Spanish students. It's a yearly retreat they've been doing there since the year 2000. What I learned was that community is created through experience, difficult and rewarding daily experience, thoughtful experience. And getting lost or getting confused or getting upset was all part of the journey. What counted is how you responded to those situations, and especially not blaming others for them, since that didn't help anybody. All the somewheres that we arrived at the end of the day were absolutely brand new and unique. Since we didn't know where we'd end up with, the places we did end up were all great. We simply enjoyed arriving somewhere and finding others from our group there as well. And along the way, we met all sorts of wonderful, unique, or quirky people. It was part of the journey. Plus, you found out that the people you thought you knew were also wonderful, unique, or somewhat quirky. But there were gems there once you dug around a little during long conversations on the road. Unsurprisingly, meals and food were a great context for living out community, for enjoying what it means to be part of a community, even if you didn't explicitly bring that thought to mind. It was the being part of that was important and transformative. Looking at some of the photographs that I took along the way, it struck me that a number of them were like the famous painting of Jesus and the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. This made me think of all the time that Jesus spent walking all over Galilee with his disciples. I could now appreciate how they were taught, how they became disciples. When you're walking next to someone for hours on end, especially if you're going in the same direction together, conversations become very interesting and unfailingly transformative and deep. This is what happens when we engage in any genuine community. Walking in the same direction, listening to one another, making allowances for some things. These are all part of the basics of what it means to be a community. It's clear that De La Salle understood this and recommended it to those who shared his charism. And it also remains good advice for today. As a last little exercise, take a minute, pause the video, and make a note of how you would answer these 3 questions. In your own Lasallian community, what stands out as the best things? What stands out as the most challenging? And what can you personally do about this? Give yourself enough time to be specific. Then return for a final thought. So here at the end, let's leave the words and go to the imagination. Take a look at this painting by Rob Gonzalez. How is this image like community? Stretch your imagination. This exercise is best done in a group where people's thoughts build up together and bounce off each other. But see if you can just come up with one thing, one analogy. And my final thought about community is one of my favorite statements by De La Salle. It's his best advice, I think, about living in God's presence. And it's his best advice about community. Here's what he says. Be satisfied with what you can do, since this satisfies God. But do not spare yourself on what you can do with the help of grace. be convinced that provided you are willing, you can do more with the help of God's grace than you imagine. May you take his advice to heart and thereby continue to support and build up your own Lasallian educational community.